Hello, my name is Phil. I'm the rector of the Draycott and Lem Valley Benefice, and this is my Sunday sermon for the 14th of June 2026. Before we explore the passage, we should read it. So our reading today comes from Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 to 15. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the trees of Mamre. While he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day, Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favour in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so that you can be refreshed, then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 sheaths of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." He ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old. Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh." Have you ever wondered where the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses" comes from? I googled it this week, and it turns out that it comes from a comic strip that ran in American newspapers in 1913 to 1938. And the story goes that Arthur Mormad was a successful comic strip writer, and he earned enough to be comfortable, but he wasn't seriously wealthy. He and his wife moved to Cinderhurst in New York, which is a very wealthy community on Long Island. And he claimed that his family lived way beyond their means in their endeavour to keep up with the well-to-do class around them. When they could no longer afford to keep doing this, they left and they moved to a much more affordable place. And in that new place, he started writing comic strips which satirised his family's attempts to look like they fitted in with their much wealthier neighbours. Apparently, he initially wanted to call the strip "Keeping Up with the Smiths," but felt Joneses had more of a ring to it. That phrase, "keeping up with the Joneses," is very much in our modern vernacular now. I don't know if it's something you can immediately relate to, but I think we could all be slightly prone to falling into this one-upmanship mindset. And just to show that I'm preaching to myself as much as anyone else, I'm going to confide to you what this looks like for the clergy. You see, whenever a group of clergy get together, it's highly likely that at some point the conversation will turn to how busy and tired we are. A bit like the Monty Python Four Yorkshiremen sketch, but instead of revolving around how poor we were growing up, it revolved around how busy we are and how many hours we've worked in the last week. "You worked 50 hours last week, that's nothing. I worked 60 hours. 60 hours? Life of luxury. I regularly do an 80-hour week. Aye, but you probably take your 6 weeks holiday allowance. 6 weeks? I'm lucky if I can take off a bank holiday Monday. You take a whole day off for bank holiday Mondays." I wonder if there are other jobs where people talk like this. But whatever job we have or had if we're retired, I think there's often a level of performance that you need to give off whilst in work, isn't there? You need to show that you're indispensable to the company should redundancies come along, or you need a reference for your next job, Or maybe you've had the experience of being at the school gates and hearing how well everyone else's child is doing in class across all these millions of after school clubs that they take part in. And do you feel this slight edge of guilt that you should be signing your child up for more after school activities or spending more time coaching them through their homework at home? Or perhaps we left the school gates and the corporate ladder behind some decades ago, and now that performance looks like standing at the fence, talking to a neighbour or sitting in the coffee morning or having a chat, refusing to admit that health is failing or that there's a terrifying diagnosis or that we need help because we're really worried of looking weak or becoming a burden. We also wonder if there's sometimes a kind of downward competition as well, where we kind of compete to be the humblest, to be struggling the most, or to have the least idealised life. So I think whatever stage of life we're in, there's always a level of performance we feel we have to give off, whether that's projecting success or struggle. We all find ourselves projecting at different times in our lives. And that's nothing new. I've put this talk as part of our 21st Century Problems, First Century Solutions series. But actually the passage we're looking at today goes back way further than the first century. It goes back to about 1800 BC, where we meet Abraham, who's the father of Israel, but also a nomadic Iron Age chief. Our passage begins with him sitting in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. This is a defensive position. He's got all his possessions and his household all around him. And he's sitting at the entrance to the main tent in the centre of the camp, looking out across the landscape. And he notices three men coming towards him. And we're told that he rushes towards them. And as readers, we are told that these three men are God, because verse 1 tells us the Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre. But Abraham doesn't know this from afar. So his instinct is to run towards them and meet them before they reach the centre of the camp. He doesn't know if these men are friend or foe. And having three fighting age men he doesn't know in the middle of his camp is not something he necessarily wants to risk. So he rushes to meet them before they get much further past the camp's perimeter. And when he meets them, he does some interesting things. He bows low to the ground. He begs them to stay for a meal. He arranges for his servants to wash their feet. And he puts on an impressive banquet for them. Why would he do that? Well, some people read this text as Abraham immediately recognizing that it's God and then therefore wanting to show extraordinary hospitality to God. Perhaps that's true. But whatever Abraham knows at this point, one thing is clear. He puts on a remarkably impressive display. He bows low to the ground. He has their feet washed by servants. He orders a feast to be prepared. Everything about the encounter communicates honour, generosity, and the resources of his household. In Abraham's world, hospitality isn't just a private act of kindness. It's also very public. It reflects the honour of the family and the standing of the household. This feast says something about who Abraham is. It demonstrates that he is a man of substance, a man with servants, livestock, resources, and massive cultural influence. In his world, your survival depended on your public honour. And that perhaps explains why he just got his tired wife to engage in a piece of baking that defies all reasonable kitchen logic. Abraham runs back to the tent and tells Sarah to get three seas of fine flour to bake cakes for these visitors. Now these seeths, or however you pronounce it, don't necessarily sound like a lot to a modern ear, but apparently it works out roughly 30 pounds or 14 kilograms of dough. So it's enough flour to bake well over 20 large loaves of bread. And remember, the setting is the absolute peak of the midday desert heat. The sun is beating down. The tent is an oven. And Abraham suddenly expects Sarah to mobilize a large-scale emergency baking operation for 3 unexpected guests who've just wandered in off the road. 20 loaves of bread for 3 guests. It's worth pausing here because it's very easy to judge people who seem performative or to feel shallow and fake when we ourselves give off that I'm okay vibe when we're not really. But often this isn't simple vanity. Human beings always live with pressures and expectations about how we're meant to present ourselves to others. We project confidence when we're frightened. We project competence when we're overwhelmed. We project strength when we are struggling. So for Abraham, maintaining the honour and reputation of his household is a matter of basic survival. For us, it might be keeping our jobs, protecting our children from worry, or avoiding becoming a burden to others as we age. Beneath all the public honour and modern performances, there's a very deep, very common human driver: fear. We're terrified of what will happen if people discover we can't cope. So that's the setup for the bombshell in our passage. Abraham is standing outside, surrounded by this massive, impressive display of household honour. But then the guests do something that completely flips the narrative. In verse 9, they ask a single devastating question. Where's your wife, Sarah? That one question drives a bit of a stake through the heart of the performance, because it demonstrates to Abraham that they know exactly who he and his family are. They are demonstrating that they know that he is married and his wife's name is Sarah. Now, on one hand, that might just show that they'd asked around before coming into the camp, except that Sarah was called Sarai until God changed her name to Sarah in the previous chapter. So at this stage, Abraham and Sarah haven't had time to do whatever the Bronze Age equivalent of the annual round-robin Christmas letter, telling everyone that this year Sarah is started to become named Sarah. At this stage, Sarah's new name was probably only known to those in the camp and to God. So when the strangers ask this question, it's a moment when it's clear that actually this is God who's come into the camp to meet with Abraham. So what is interesting is that God reveals himself not by saying, I am God, but by showing that he knows Abraham and he knows Abraham's family. It cuts through the performative hospitality, trying to project honour, and says, I know you because I'm the God you met and who made those promises to you the other night. And then comes the real kicker. In verse 10, the lead traveller says, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. He repeats the promise from the previous night. Abraham knows for sure that he is speaking with God. But Sarah is in the hot tent baking the bread. She doesn't hear the whole conversation. She just hears snippets, including that final line. Sarah will have a son. And she laughs. She laughs because she thinks it's ridiculous. We're told that she's 90, and our passage uses some pretty unsubtle ancient euphemisms to explain that she's well past childbearing age and that she and Abraham haven't been doing very much of the thing you need to do to have children. But again, the realization of who's standing outside comes when they show that they know her. And they ask, why did Sarah laugh? And at this point, Sarah is terrified. The text said she was afraid and she lied and she said, I did not laugh. But the stranger knew about that small laugh to herself, a tiny internal chuckle, maybe not even audible outside the tent. So the stranger knowing about that was deeply unsettling. And let's sit with Sarah's fear for a moment there, because in a sense, what I've just said could be a bit threatening. We've established that all of us from time to time give off a performance. We project an image. And our passage shows us that God sees right through the curtain and he notices it. And if I were to wrap up this talk here, that would be terrifying, wouldn't it? If I ended the sermon now and sent you off with this simple message, you can't fool God, I'd just be leaving you with an image of a cosmic inspector who catches us out when we try to put our best foot forward. But that's not the end point of the passage. Because when God looks past the impressive banquet and he pierces through that tent flap, he doesn't judge them for trying to maintain their honour. In fact, later on in the Bible, in the New Testament, they're actually praised and held up as an example for it. What he does is he blesses them. God doesn't condemn Abraham for putting on a massive spread. He doesn't reject Sarah for her cynical laugh. Instead, he uses that moment to promise them the one thing that they have longed for, but long since given up on: a child of their own. You see, in our worlds, when the performance fails, the consequences can be brutal. If your performance fails at work, managers can start capability proceedings. If you say the wrong thing at the school gates too many times, the whispers can start. If you're retired and you drop the invincible independent act at a coffee morning, you may find some well-meaning person tries to help you in a way you really don't want to be helped. But when we stand before God, the need to perform completely evaporates. God looks at this elderly, tired couple and essentially says, you can stop running to the perimeter now. You don't need to bake 30 pounds of bread to prove your household is secure or successful to me. And you don't need to hide your silent, cynical hurts in a tent. I didn't come into your camp because you had it all together. I came because I know exactly how empty and tired you feel right now. And that's the exact spot where I am going to work. So my question for us is simple. How are you baking 30 pounds of bread, and who are you baking 30 pounds of bread for? What's the perimeter that you're trying hard to guard this week? What's the performance that you are sweating over? Whether it's trying to look hyper competent at work, perfectly sorted at the school gates, or entirely unbothered and independent over the garden face. Or maybe, like those Four Yorkshiremen, it's a downward performance where you're magnifying your struggles just to feel noticed and seen. The ancient message of our text is that you can step off the stage. You don't have to fake it until you make it with the architect of the universe, who already knows your real name. He already hears the private sighs we pass off in the dark when life doesn't go to plan. His invitation to you is not an invitation to work harder, to look busier, or to pretend you're invincible. It's to drop the flower, to step from behind the curtain and let him meet you in your actual weakness. Because it's when we finally run out of our own options that we realize that nothing is too hard for him. And when we come to him as we are and come before him, he blesses us. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you so much that you love us and you know us. Thank you that we don't need to put on airs and graces before you, because you know who we are and you love us and you care for us. Amen.